You are listening to the Tenets on the Kyle Dempster Studios Network. To support us, visit patreon.com/Kyle Dempster Studios. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the Tenets. My name is Kyle, and I'm joined here by my co-host, as always, Stark Realm. Hi, Stark. How are you doing today?
Pretty good.
We are yet again meeting in an odd time, in an odd location, to have an interview with the amazing Rich Lambert, the creative director of Elder Scrolls Online. Hi, Rich. How are you?
Hello, I am doing fine. I have a beer and I am very happy.
Well, that's all one needs to have a good evening, I think. So you're ready to go, and we are going to throw you some questions here. We're going to do a look back because it is the 5-year anniversary of Elder Scrolls Online. We're hitting the 25th anniversary of the series, or the franchise, I maybe should say. And we thought we could just do a look back from the start. Stark, you've been playing since beta, is that right?
Yeah, for ESO, yeah.
And I've only been playing ESO since June of 2018. So this will be an interesting look back because Stark experienced a lot of this. I did not. So I think that's going to be an interesting kind of juxtaposition, talking through some of this stuff, getting Rich's input on why something happened when and what the logic was behind it, what kind of motivated you to maybe just want to do some of these things. So to start you off with an easy question, what exactly... easy maybe in quotes. What is your position entail as creative director?
I thought you said this was going to be easy.
Sometimes that's the hardest, huh?
Yeah. So I guess when you boil it all down to kind of a very short couple of sentences, ultimately I'm responsible for everything that goes into Elder Scrolls Online. So I work with all the teams in coming up with roadmaps and stories and features, just to make sure that they all kind of fit together, they work together, and they fit within kind of the tone and theme of Elder Scrolls. And then on top of all of that, I'm the lucky one that gets to do a lot of the press stuff and do interviews and meet the community and do that side of things as well, which is actually a lot of fun.
I was going to say, that's not, I said easy, but you did a great job of distilling it down because I know that requires a heck of a lot of effort there. But you have been doing a lot of press, too, for elsewhere here lately, and you've got to go out. Well, we got to meet in person recently in March there, and then you were off to what? Well, you went off to London then, I think, next, and then followed by PAX East, huh?
And there was also a San Francisco trip in there as well for North American press. So yes, it's been a very, very busy. Well, March was very busy, and then April is going to be busy as well. I'm actually going to Elfia this week, which is in the Netherlands.
Wow, that's awesome! Is there a chance people get to meet you out there? Do you like you're doing meet and greets and stuff, kind of thing?
Yeah. So our Benelux team is set up this whole thing. It's at the largest roleplay convention in the Netherlands in some big, huge medieval castle. And ESO is going to be there and playable, and we're going to do meet and greets and talk to some press and do the whole thing. It's going to be a blast.
That's very cool. Awesome. Because, I mean, this is a huge year. I mean, we got to see, we were watching live the Twitch stream with both days. I think it was, Friday and Saturday. And the Friday was more focused on the Elder Scrolls as a franchise. So you were up there on stage with Todd and Matt and the rest. And then the next day was mainly elsewhere focused with a Q&A sort of portion. So there's a lot happening. And I thought maybe we could start off by talking what your specific history is in the Elder Scrolls franchise first. And maybe take us through chronologically how you got into Elder Scrolls Online.
Well, it was almost 15 years ago that I started at Bethesda Game Studios. Next year and next February will be 15 years, which is pretty crazy when I think about it. because that is very rare in this industry. You're not fortunate enough to usually stay in one place. You usually do a game and then move somewhere else and do another game. So 15 years is a long haul. When I first started there, I was a producer and I worked on Oblivion. And was fortunate enough to kind of get in the Elder Scrolls world that way, because I'd always been a fan. I'd played Morrowind, I'd played Daggerfall, and seeing kind of how the magic was made was really interesting and fun. And then in 2007, right? Yeah, 2007, I got called into Todd's office one day, and Matt Firer, who's the president of ZeniMax Online Studios, was sitting in there, and Todd was like, Matt, this is Rich. Rich, this is Matt. Matt's going to make the online version of Elder Scrolls. Matt, please take Rich. All he does is talks about making MMOs. Like, that's what he wants to do. And we've been working together ever since.
That's awesome. So it truly is for you, I mean, an extreme passion project, it sounds like, where you were a true fan before, you even got to the next stage in it there.
Absolutely. Elder Scrolls is so diverse, and there's so much cool lore and story, and the world is so amazing that I was hooked pretty much right away, and I wanted to kind of take it to that next step and mix it with the, I guess, genre that I love so much.
And so a question comes to mind of why. So you said you were talking nonstop about making Elder Scrolls into an online space, and it fascinates me because I think you and I have had this conversation before, definitely on Twitch and stuff, where I said when I was playing Oblivion, I was desperately wanting an online version at the time, but I mean, we're relegated to Xboxes and limited connectivity back then. So what made you want to take this space and put it on an online platform?
Well, I mean, we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours.
Well, we can't.
But I think some of the finer points of that are some of the big reasons why is, I love the whole concept of playing with friends. I love that social aspect. Mm-hmm. MMOs is always are always going to have a very soft spot in my heart. I actually met my wife playing MMOs in EverQuest a long ass time ago, and so I like that kind of dynamic of there's everybody you see in the world is potentially a real person, and you can have very different interactions with those people from the NPCs. And those social dynamics of working together very, very hard to kill a boss or uncover some plot or just talk about the stories really changes how you play games. And it's fascinating to me.
That's awesome. I didn't know that you two met through that. That's really cool, meeting through EverQuest.
We did. Yeah, wow. It was 20 years ago. Yeah. And we've been married 17.
Oh, wow.
Because I think EverQuest is about 20 now, isn't it? Or 22.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's,
wow.
I mean, that's one of the things that I love the most about the MMO space is that you do hear stories like that. There's so much real life invested in them. And that's something we'll talk about all the time is how, and we had Casual Ranger on here a couple weeks back, and he was talking about the same thing. He talked about our trip to ZeniMax and how you meet these people online. Some say, oh, these aren't real friends. But then you walk into a room and it's like, oh, yeah, I've known you for the last however long. And you just pick up the conversation naturally. So that's very cool to hear.
Yep.
Now, here's a more specific one, just because I'm curious for this. Is there a specific mechanic from the Elder Scrolls games, either Oblivion or prior, that you especially wanted to see in the online space? So anything like houses or exploring dungeons, was there maybe one driving factor?
I don't know that it was at the mechanic level. Mm-hmm. I think it was more at kind of the world and history kind of level. I think one of the things that I love so much about Elder Scrolls is there's not a single source of truth. There's lots of mystery, and for every point there's a counterpoint in the lore, and it very much feels like a living, breathing world, and that was very different than a lot of other IPs out there. So that's probably the big part. And then the world is just so massive. It's huge. Like we've been over the last 5 years trying to put more and more of it in the game, and we still don't have it all yet. So it's pretty crazy when you think of it at that level.
It is. It really is. I mean, that's one thing I noticed as someone that was just doing the single players. Then you come to the online. I'm obviously not a huge lore head myself, but seeing. I mean, I guess I didn't even have real context to where Cyrodiil was in relation to Skyrim, in relation to this, that, and the other, until you put it in this great context of ESO where you can travel between them. And you're right, it is immensely vast. And you guys have done a great job filling it in piece by piece and continuously entertaining us with that. So I think maybe we should hand it over to Stark here in a sec. Stark, do you want to kind of cue up some conversation about the earlier days of the game since you actually experienced it?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, because there have been a lot of changes.
Yeah.
Just a few.
Just a few little ones, yeah. We've got some stuff. We got some stuff penciled in, but there was a lot of stuff that floated through also. Like one of the things that got cut earlier was we're talking about the justice system, because that was something that was added post-launch. One big thing was champion points, where it was like, this is completely reworking post-game character progression, really. And kind of was wondering what went into the thought process when you take the previous existence, so that was the vet rank system, and just rip that out entirely and replace it with champion points, where it's an account-wide system.
Well, I think part of it is, what you just kind of said is it's more account-wide. One of the things that is very difficult to do when you play a game for as long as you do, say, ESO, or we hoped people would play an ESO, is you're going to want to branch out and try some of the other classes and do some of the other things on different characters. And with veteran ranks kind of being what they were and how much time and effort it required to get to that point, we were seeing people really sticking to one character and almost getting to the point of burning out. And we wanted to, soften some of that blow. And that's kind of where the champion point system kind of came in, was, you're, no matter what character you're playing on, you're always making progress towards that kind of end goal. And it softened that burden. It softened that leveling curve, if you will, and made it so, yeah, more people branched out, more people played different things and tried different things.
That's very, what do I want to say? It's so amazing that concept exists, and yet we see it a lot of the time that people struggle to understand it, because I don't see much of this in the gaming space currently that really rewards people for branching out. I mean, other MMOs are still centric about you've leveled this character from 1 to whatever, unless you want to do all of that work again from scratch, and it's going to take you a whole, potentially another year to catch up. Right. Kind of leave you in that boat. So that's kind of was it a groundbreaking system when you thought about that, Rich, or did you see it?
I mean, there's other games that do something kind of similar, but it was something that we felt really strongly about, and we definitely liked that concept of, that kind of shared progression. And it wasn't the only thing that we've done that's kind of different and almost groundbreaking. So, we're not really afraid to take risks in that regard.
What are you thinking of there?
Well, I'm specifically thinking of One Tamriel.
Okay.
That was a massive change to kind of the paradigm of MMOs and Elder Scrolls Online.
Yeah, that's kind of a nuts thing when you step back and think about it, because, again, the entire idea with a lot of MMO structure is level banding zones, and that just completely discarded that.
It did. It definitely it definitely took us some time internally just to kind of wrap our heads around what we were actually proposing to do.
Because remember that the first hint of that we got was kind of like, we got a hint of that with the Imperial City and with Cyrodiil at launch, but Cyrodiil was, or the Imperial City was a year after launch over that. And then, but it was like Hrothgar was the first time we saw a prototype of that really with PvE.
Yep.
And it was still, I think, 2 years after that before we got that everywhere.
Yeah, so it turns out that it's very easy to test something in a small confined space, and it's very hard to do that across the entirety of your game.
Huh, who would have thought?
But yeah, that was actually one of the things that when we were building Orsinium and the whole that whole update was, can we test some theories out with this? Can we prove it? You know, we saw it in Cyrodiil. You know, battle leveling was always a thing in Cyrodiil, and that worked pretty well. And people seemed to enjoy it, and we started talking about that concept of, well, what happens if that happens in PvE? And we really liked the concept of, it doesn't matter what level you are, it doesn't matter when you started. It doesn't really matter kind of what your gear was. You should just be able to kind of get in and play with your friends. And that was what started that whole One Tamriel concept.
As someone that just recently got to ESO, I have to say how massive that is to come into the community, especially over on Twitch, where you have people come through streams and they want to just hop in and play with you at any time. Playing other MMOs online where, you know, it is level gated, or the questing itself is faction gated, which One Tamriel was. For our newer listeners, you know, it's something wonderful where you can log in and you can immediately just go hang out, and you can immediately go tackle a dungeon or, you know, some sort of delve, whatever that is. As long as they own the content, they can interact. That's a huge shift. And I see some other games now starting to loosen their level restrictions, making some older maps now, you know, encompass more of that leveling process. But still, I don't think I've seen anything do it as wonderfully as this. And I think Stark could talk to this a bit more of how was that? How was it just received as an overall in the community here?
I'm going to take Stark's lead on this one and hear what he has to say on that, because I bet you our opinions are a little different.
I remember there were a lot of people that were really happy with it. Like, again, straight up, when you're walking in from nowhere, it's absolutely fantastic because then you can mix. There were segments of the community that were really pissed about silver and gold disappearing. There have been so there used to be a silver and a gold version of the Alliance zones, and these served kind of like New Game Plus, New Game Plus Plus. And back at launch, these were freaking brutal. Like, you'd go into Silver Glenumbra and you would get wrecked by mudcrab.
Wow.
Like, it was just like, you've defeated Molag Bal. Now face the real threat, mud crabs. So those got nerfed down a fair amount, I think, in the first 6 months. And then they'd kind of been normalized so that it was a reasonable progression, but a lot of people missed that because it was still significantly harder. And there were people who were really pissed when it dropped because it didn't come with new content. I think, and Rich will have to correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think the assumption at that time was that Murkmire was going to be the next drop, and it was going to be an adventure zone like Craglorn.
Oh, QuakeCon.
Yeah. Okay. And so this was the assumption of what was scheduled there, what was going to happen, and then obviously that didn't happen at all on any level. And so we had 3 months where there wasn't, the entire map was new content, but we didn't have any new content to go through. And there were some people who were upset about that. And the silver and gold zones were gone, which meant we no longer had those difficulty spikes, like to go into the harder content that way in the base game. And so people were pissed about that. And then a few of the proc sets that came in with One Tamriel may have been a little bit more potent than intended. That's what I remember offhand, though. So what else you got there?
I was gonna say,
yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Rich.
From our point of view, and actually some of the things that Stark mentioned, you know, we had a lot of those internal debates as a team. There were a number of people that had grave reservations about doing this, especially seeing as they were so used to kind of the MMO norm where that's your progression. You're taking a form of progression away from the player. And what we had to kind of keep explaining and walking through the team, Ian, is we're really not, you know, the progression is in the character and in leveling up your skills and learning new skills and building the gear and all that. Like, we didn't take any of that away. We just made it so that You can always play with your friends. You never really make a bad choice, because at launch, if you chose Aldmeri Dominion and Kyle, you were on EP for whatever reason, we could never play together, ever. We couldn't even really talk to each other.
Wow.
We could be in the same guild, but we couldn't do anything together. And what One Tamriel did was remove all those restrictions. You know, my wife and I can play ESO together now, which we couldn't really do at the time unless I had an ult, because she is the type of player that wanders around and loots every crate and barrel and reads every book and listens to all the dialogue, and I'm off killing all the monsters I can as fast as I can because I'm a power gamer. So it really changed the dynamic and made Elder Scrolls Online feel like an Elder Scrolls game. And it was very interesting after we launched it and people really started to get in and play it. I actually had a number of people come to me and be like, hey, you know, we were wrong. This was the right choice. This is so much better than we thought it was going to be. And that was awesome.
I was going to ask you, my next question is looking back on it, what sort of reactions are people having now? Because I could see that what you said makes sense about the internal kind of being scared that you're removing a whole.
Oh yeah, it was terrifying.
It's a real gamble of the dice, a roll of the dice there, but. From a relatively new player perspective, it is immensely wonderful to walk into it. It feels like you're in a space, like you said, it feels like you're truly playing an Elder Scrolls game where you can wander up and find some random person doing some random act, and it adds to the immersion. Is that kind of still the mentality now? People are just very happy with that being the change?
Absolutely. You know, it's probably one of the single best things we ever did to ESO. And it, looking back on it, we knew that what we were doing had legs, because like I said, we had kind of tested it in Cyrodiil for a while. And then when we absolutely did that test in Orsinium, everybody was like, holy shit, this is great. And then it was just trying to figure out how the rest of the game would work rather than just that confined space. And yeah, today that's the thing. One of the things that I trumpet every time I get a chance to is ESO is different because of this. It's easy to pick up and play. It's easy to, step out when times get rough and you don't have time to play a game, and you can always come back and you haven't really lost anything. You can continue to play with your friends.
That's a great point right there, because over on Twitch, we've been hit with a lot of players who are coming back, probably because the Elsewhere Press and the Necromancer are really drawing them out. And they're saying, hey, I own...
And dragons. Don't forget
dragons. That. You sell it, Rich. You sell it all, man. So dragons as well. And they're coming back and they're saying, I haven't played since beta, or I owned the game and I played it for the first year and I got bored and, left it for whatever reason. And they go, so what have I missed? And I'm like, well, if you weren't playing in the last 2 years, I think you're wandering into an entirely new game. I wasn't there, but... And then when they hear about One Tamriel, it's like, whoa. And they go, did I miss out on anything? But because of you removing those levels, because it's all horizontal progression, that you don't stack things to the point that they all get thrown away.
Right.
That's incredible, because as a guy that's played other MMOs that happens, where if you weren't there in, these specific 2 years, you can't play that content anymore. I never came into this game and felt like I was missing out on anything. I felt like it was just all in front of me, that nothing was behind me when I first stepped in. And that, I'm sure, has helped on the content side too, because that means that everything you've done is still alive and well. Is that something you guys think about a lot, that you've created kind of truly evergreen content in here? Absolutely. I think that was another one of the reasons why we decided to do One Tamriel, is at launch, you really only a third of the population got to see a third of the content. Wow. And
One Tamriel really opened it up so that all of the content we built was there, and you could go and play it at any time you wanted to. If you got bored with a particular zone, you could just go to the next zone. You didn't have to grind your way through and slog it through because you weren't into the story. You could just go pick another story to play.
Well, I think that kind of segues us into the next point here of talking about the different content that was released for the game. Because for the new players out there listening to this, ESO has accumulated a large swath of DLC content in addition to your now yearly release of chapters, which are ESO's expansions. So I kind of wanted to talk through here. Stark and I were just putting together different ideas. Again, him because he experienced it live, and myself looking back retrospectively there. And
okay, we're not going through all 22 updates, right?
No, we're not.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
No.
Yeah. I've got the
good.
We've got all the patch notes here. I'm going line by line. Ready?
Why did you change werewolves so that the passive no longer has to be attached to this ultimate?
I see that there's a 2014 nerf here, and but I did want to know what. So the first DLC is the Imperial City I'm seeing here, and I was curious what, and especially in conjunction with the Imperial City being removed out of Cyrodiil, I think it's timely to talk about it. What motivated that to be the first piece of DLC? This PvP PvE space that came in.
This was something that was kind of the brainchild of Mr. Brian Wheeler, who is our lead combat and PvP designer. And he really wanted to see a kind of different style of gameplay. And he had this idea of kind of putting the two together and giving players a space to go in and have their PvP, but have PvE at the same time. And we thought that using Imperial City for this made a lot of sense because at the time, or in our timeline, the Imperial City is constantly under siege and is constantly going through this whole, it's captured, it's, sieged by another group, it's recaptured, it's the interregnum. And we wanted to get that feeling through with some of the storylines that we had in here.
That makes sense. It's a very pivotal plot line to what is happening. Now, maybe something to ask as well is, this is a PvE, PvP zone we're talking about, and has it kind of cooled off the idea of creating more PvP focused? Well, I guess is the idea of the inner mix zones. Has that kind of cooled off, or are you guys just focusing more on Cyrodiil right now and some changes there?
I wouldn't say it's cooled off or that we're shying away from it, but we're definitely kind of listening to and looking at what content players are spending a lot of time in. And we always want to try to have something for everybody. But some of the feedback that we got with Imperial City was, he is really fun in there, but take all the PvE out of there. You get into a big, really cool, epic, kind of fun PvP battle, and then one of the zone sweepers kind of comes in, and then you have to deal with that. Or you're down in the sewers, and one of the roaming bannermen, shows up, and then suddenly things are different. I think it's some of our most entertaining content. And I've played the crap out of Imperial City. So I wouldn't say we wouldn't ever do it again, but it's definitely not something that everybody's like, oh my God, more of this, please.
They are two. Well, I mean, there's definitely people that cross the line between PvP and PvE a lot, but they are factions that tend to gravitate to the extremes of the spectrum, at least from my viewing of it. So I'll see a lot of people that'll say that I'm going to go into the Imperial City, I need to grind out some Telvar or something like that, and then they get into a little bit more PvP than they wanted to chew off initially. So I could see how, on the converse side of that, the PvP crew didn't want as many bosses coming through and ripping up their faces.
Right. But all that being said, splitting it out into its own campaign and having a dedicated Imperial City is really going to bring it back to kind of its former glory years, where there's tons of people in there all the time. PvP is going to be crazy in there, and the bosses in the PvE will just kind of happen, but people are really in there to PvP and kill each other.
I'm so excited for that to get pulled out of Cyrodiil because, I mean, it is a little bit of a learning curve for people, especially people want to go in there because they know there's PvE, PvP, but they also don't know how to get there because it isn't, the most obvious. They have to load into Cyrodiil, then make their way to the entrance, et cetera, or at least that's the common option. So this is going to be really cool, and Stark has kind of talked me up on it too, being that I never got to experience its golden days. And I think, like you said, there's going to be a lot of people in there.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a blast.
Stark, did you kind of want to talk about some of these guilds here getting added into the game?
Yeah, this was actually sort of a gap at long. Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood were not present, and then those sort of came in with their own. I guess now they'd be story content zones, like the way the definition for zones has changed.
The story DLC, yep.
Yeah, the story DLC and zones. So that was kind of. I'm kind of wondering what happened here that caused these to come in the way they did when they did.
Well, I mean, the game is huge. There's a lot of things that we wanted to do and get in, and these were things that we knew we had to do, but they didn't kind of fit into the original paradigm of the game. And so it wasn't something that was prioritized as highly as what we shipped with.
Yeah.
But, it was always on our roadmap of things to do. I mean, they're huge parts of Elder Scrolls and the lore of Elder Scrolls. And once we kind of started going down that route of DLCs, and it just made sense to do them for that.
Yeah, because I remember being an outside observer how much buzz there was on the internet about the Dark Brotherhood getting added into ESO. And again, at the time, I didn't. What did that really mean to me? Except that I was a guy that always enjoyed those quests. So I imagine those were hit with a lot of excitement within the community at the time.
Absolutely. Dark Brotherhood especially was something that people really enjoyed. I think part of that had to do with the Blade of Woe and kind of what we did with Blade of Woe. That's still probably my wife's single favorite thing we have ever done in ESO.
Oh, really?
She loves the Blade of Woe.
That's amazing. So she's the one killing all of our NPCs and cities.
Yep. And she giggles every time she does it.
Well, those are some really cool kill animations, though. Like, that is the first time when you first get that Blade of Woe and you're like, wow, this does what? I mean, that's a real throw that makes this game maybe feel even more in line with some of the others, the single players, is the kill cam shots from that. It really, if you're a Dark Brotherhood player in Skyrim, you often get things like that. And to see it in this game really ties it together that, yes, you're a member of the Dark Brotherhood, you're out there doing no good, let's say. And so I still hear a lot of new players when they start up that quest chain. They are, I want to say maybe that's the one I get the most feedback on. It's, that they enjoyed it the most. People definitely go out of their way to tell me that they did that one and that they've, now they're working on getting some of their, costumes from it or achievement items, anything like that. So I think that was a smashing success. Plus the zone is very cool too. The Gold Coast as a whole is a very beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say the Gold Coast is sort of wonderful weaponized nostalgia because it's just like you've been here in Oblivion, you recognize the layout, and then it's like, okay, well, here you are again. It's great.
Right.
It really is.
And maybe that's a little bit of a question too for you, Rich, while we have you here as our victim, is how do you guys go about that? Like what, and this kind of ties into one of our last questions about the Necromancer, but at the same time, how do you decide, or what is kind of a general thought process when you're looking at adding in a zone there? Because I'm guessing you want to hit some of the major landmarks, but at the same time, we're a long ways before what we saw in Oblivion, for example. So how do you kind of approach something like the Gold Coast in general terms?
Well, in the Gold Coast, we knew we were 1,000 years before, Oblivion and Skyrim. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted to do was kind of have some of that nostalgia factor, like Stark was mentioning, but put our own spin on it and our own take on it. And that's something that we like to do just kind of in general when we're thinking about zones or where to go or what to do next is, where kind of haven't we been yet? What can we kind of make our own? What doesn't have a lot of story and lore about it? and B, what is the story that we want to tell? And a lot of times when Matt and I are talking about these things, we get down to like one word things to kind of describe the feeling. So, with Morrowind, it was nostalgia. With Somerset, it was, kind of high fantasy. Elsewhere is revenge. It kind of all fits a theme and a tone so that, when we're talking about those things, the team all kind of understands and can connect to that theme.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's a great way to kind of break it down, because I think you really nail those. And it's really cool to see that nostalgia come to light. I like what you guys do when you take that creative spin on it, because it is great to have, focusing on Gold Coast, things like Anvil there, where you can say, I've been here before, but then, like you said, the rest of it is kind of once you leave the city gates, you really are playing in the Elder Scrolls timeline at that, or the Elder Scrolls Online timeline. So you are experiencing whatever they're fighting up against. I think that's a good spin on it. You guys have that great balance worked out.
Yeah, and there's like I said earlier, there's so much lore, and a lot of the things that you read about in some of the other Elder Scrolls games, we get to show. We get to take those stories that are in lore books and build on them and have you experience them, which is a ton of fun.
Wow, I can't even imagine what that looks like, looking at the lore book system and implementing those into the game. That sounds like quite a lot of work.
It can be.
So kind of moving along here, a big change to the game, especially in my sphere of Twitch, I think, is...
Oh, I know where this is
going. Do you now? Homestead and housing.
I figured.
Me? Housing? What? But this is an incredible change that, people have asked for in other MMOs for years and have gotten nothing have gotten nothing. But then you come over here to Elder Scrolls Online, and that's the selling point I always forget to lay on people, unless I'm in a home at the time, is I go, oh, wait, you can actually customize this. You could customize your house. How did that come about? Why did you guys take on that project?
Wow. How much dirty laundry do I air? No, I'm kidding.
All of it, Rich.
No, I'm totally kidding. We're all, big fans of MMO, big fans of Elder Scrolls, and Elder Scrolls, has precedence for housing. In Skyrim, you got to do some of that. And we wanted to try to deliver on that experience, but make it Elder Scrolls Online, which was more customization, more freedom, in our combat, compared to other MMOs. It doesn't matter what class you are. You can be a tank if you're a sorcerer, or you can be a healer if you're a dragon knight. It doesn't matter. You can just do those things. And so we took that take on housing. What could that mean? What can you build? How can you do it? And that's kind of the system we came up with. Because
it is a very large change for the better from what we had in things like Oblivion and Skyrim, where you can move an item around your house, but it's not really movable. You're more like decorating an entire room. To come to a system like this, where you're actually choosing each and every furnishing item you put in that house, is an incredible amount of freedom. And also, I like what you guys have done. I've always complimented this part of the system, that you've worked these into kind of that one Tamriel mindset, where now the furnishing items are actually locked behind different achievements, which push people like me that are not always questing to go and complete a zone, because you're actually going to get this really symbolic piece to put in your house. Was that a natural kind of flow from the one Tamriel mindset? How did those two work together, or were those separate ideas?
I would say they're separate ideas, but similar. So the whole concept of the achievement vendor and whatnot, and your house, we wanted your house to kind of be your trophy case, your exploits, your spoils of war, if you will. So that's where the whole, dungeon busts came from, where all of the bosses, the end bosses in each of the dungeons drop, trophy heads. Like you said, completing quests, major quests gives you cool items that you can put in your house. We wanted your house to be a reflection of you and the story and the journey that you've done. And I think that's one of the other things that Elder Scrolls Online does so well is all of the systems are really tightly integrated, and they all have play and counterplay in them. And they're the crafting system is directly tied in to the dungeons, because you can get a piece of gear from the dungeons, upgrade it. It's not just I craft these things and dungeons are their own separate thing. Same thing with PvP. And then you add in the layer of housing on top of that, and they all kind of go together. You can get crafting stations and put them in your home and do all those things together.
I'm glad you call that out, because I don't think that's always something that's so obvious and maybe sometimes intended, is that it's not as obvious. Go ahead, Stark.
No, I was the audio cut out.
Oh, sorry. I was
it's okay.
Just saying that you just got me thinking. We go through, we clear a dungeon, we get the motifs out of it, so we can get the style of the gear from that dungeon. They really do play together in a huge way, and like you said, it's a trophy case sort of thing. The house. But it really gets people, I love that it gets people into different aspects of the game, that it kind of encourages you to go out and do something that you wouldn't. And the same goes for the fashion system there, where you're getting some pieces of fashion just through the PvP system is a really fun way to get people to open their horizons to new content when they otherwise might just be like, nope, I'm just going to do PvE forever, but I need to look cool. So I think that decision on you guys' end to do that interplay probably works out for the best, in that you're really exposing people to many different aspects.
It is. And those were all very conscious decisions that the team made in, putting all of those things where we put them. Was we wanted, the game is huge and massive, and we wanted to make sure that we reward as many different types of playstyles as possible, while at the same time introducing people to new types of playstyles.
For example, the ability to troll people with sky shards in your house.
Get them to go up and click on that, the achievement one.
Yep.
That's a good one. I actually almost went up and did that in my own house the other day. So
that's funny.
Maybe I need to take it out of my house. I think I have a problem. Stark, would you like to talk about Morrowind? Because this is a big pivotal moment.
So there's two things with this. One is, and this was, I think, driven by perceptions from earlier in game development, like just in feedback that you guys gave to the community, that we were not going to get Vardenfell ever. That was not going to be part of it. So when this
did we say that?
I don't think you explicitly said that. I think that was the perception that was given. It's like, because people asked, like right off the bat in 2014, people were asking, well, why can't we go to Vardenfell? I don't remember a hard shutdown, but I do remember some soft ones where it was like, well, no, that's not planned at all.
Never say never is probably something I said.
That's possible. That's distinctly possible.
Keeps coming true, huh? Interesting.
But that was such a shock. But again, like, what drove you to bring back the nostalgia from TES3?
I think that the big thing is that nostalgia. Morrowind is kind of the granddaddy of everything. It is a lot of people's very first games in the Elder Scrolls universe. It really put Bethesda Game Studios on the map. They'd done a bunch of other titles, but this was kind of their big moment in the sun. And the Vardenfell itself, the island itself, is so different and so alien from really anything else you've really seen in a game before. And it was just so exciting to be able to go back and explore that and look at it through the lens of 1,000 years before, it was released, kind of thing.
So the other thing that came in with this was another one where it was kicking around before launch. I was in the betas, but I was in the public betas. I wasn't part of the early beta testing, so I missed out on this. But something that had kicked around and had been mentioned, I think, by the Psijic testing group from time to time, was the Warden class had been in development. And periodically over the years, that had gotten data mined as, oh, hey, here's some stuff that was aimed for this.
Curse those data miners.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And this was the first class that we actually got added to the game. Again, I don't think you ever said never on this. I remember a very significant discussion back with Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood about not adding more active abilities into the game, though. Those are both passive only. And kind of wondering what the thought process that got the Warden into the game, and also into changing position on that.
Well, so like you said, we had experimented a little bit with the Warden concept. The Warden that we released in Morrowind was very different than the one that was in the early alphas. But as we were kind of going through and trying to figure out what is going to make Morrowind feel unique and feel special. Nostalgia is one part, telling unique different stories is another part, but having something new to play, at that time Morrowind was 2017, right?
Yeah, 2017. Yes. So Morrowind was 14 years old, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of 14 years old, although that was just kind of happenstance from our point of view, because that was our 3rd year anniversary, and we wanted to give players something else to kind of sink their teeth into. And the Warden kind of made the most amount of sense for that. The themes behind the Warden are, they're the storytellers, and that kind of fit in with the Ashlander kind of vibe and feel. We didn't want to completely make them Ashlanders, but that was kind of the inspiration behind the class.
Wow. That's because I've heard so much from people that Stark and I have talked about this a lot on the show, how the Warden came to be. And it's something... I think, Stark, you said something that there weren't going to be any more active abilities added. Is that right?
I think that was actually stated too in the discussion of Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood, that you were specifically trying to avoid adding active abilities to those skill lines. And if I'm misinterpreting that, I apologize.
That was a long time ago. That could have been said at one point or another. But things do change. And sometimes you reverse course on decisions that you make. We've definitely done that a few times over the years. I think the big ones are the things like when Tamriel and whatnot, those completely undid choices we made, before launch, with the whole, 3 unique alliances all fighting against each other. We kind of, stepped back away from that a little bit.
Well, and I think that's one of those interesting ones where, from a balance perspective, you could see, active abilities add a lot to the development plate, I imagine, where...
They do?
Yeah, just in a nutshell, yes. But yet it's a smart decision, I think, that you're giving people something totally new to create. So, soon we're going to talk about the Necromancer, but that idea that now people have an entire new way to enjoy the world around them. I can see why the decision was initially potentially made or said that we were not going to do active, but how probably beneficial in the long run it is to players' interest that they can do things like the Psijic skill line now and get, those unique abilities that admittedly look very cool and are very useful to certain builds. So I think a wise move. Now, a question here as well, with maybe kind of changing course, but on in the gear side of things. Clockwork City, we see the introduction of the transmutation station. That's definitely something most games, well, nothing I've played offers that you're usually grinding for a singular piece of gear, and if you don't get the stats or X, Y, and Z that you want from it, well, welcome to your next 24 hours of grinding. Their minds are blown by this. Why, Rich? Why a transmutation station?
This was kind of, I don't even remember who the brainchild was behind this, but I think some of this came from out of my trials and tribulations in Maelstrom Arena. I am definitely on the unlucky end when it comes to getting things. I think I actually got my sharpened Inferno staff 2 days after transmutation went in. Oh. And I had been running Maelstrom Arena every week for 2 years.
Oh, God.
This was something that, we got a lot of feedback from players, which was, it's really hard to get that perfect item. You have 3 weights of armor in light, medium, heavy. You have 9 types of weapons in the game. In terms of you have 3 destruction staves and dual wield, or one-handed and sword or shield, so on and so forth. And so when you look at it, you start to do the math. It is extremely unlikely you are going to get that perfect item. And if you don't get that item that you want, it's essentially useless to you. So we wanted to find a way to ease kind of the burden of that, where, you didn't get that one drop that you wanted, but you could make it useful to you if you put a little bit more effort. And the thing with transmutation stones was you could always make incremental progress towards getting to that cap or getting to that end point where you could actually transmute something.
That's a great point, because when I started, and it probably wasn't right away that I knew that system existed. It was probably even Stark that introduced me to it. But I thought, wow, this is odd at first. You go, this is something I've not seen before, but maybe it also feels like I am getting so much for what looks like little work up front. But then, like you say, you talk about what the loot table is actually like for these drops. And 2 years is an excessive timeline to be working on a staff. So it is.
It was over 500 runs for me. I know Inklings has a story similar to that.
Oh, gosh. I need to ask you about that someday. And that explains to anyone out there, it's like, what is this transmutation station and why? Well, there you go. Rich is saving you from 500 runs.
I mean, some people got it on 1 or 2 runs. I know actually, it's a funny story. Our lead UI designer, Bobby Weir, he actually, when we were testing Maelstrom Arena before it launched, he got a sharpened Inferno staff on dev, one of these runs. It just happened. And then it went live, and he couldn't get his sharpened Inferno staff, and that taught him to never ever loot anything again on dev. Because he didn't want to spoil it on live.
Zyno told us that exact thing the other day. He said, never go to get your real gear before your CP160, because you're going to waste your one card. Your one luck chance will go to waste. So take that
level
advice.
49 burning spellweave staff.
I still have people in our guild running it for the last, I think, probably since I've met them, trying to get it. So
wow.
Yeah, there's people. Yeah, but this is what that system does. So it comes in and alleviates that, and it's a very different concept. But I like the transmutation stone style, where you're actually working to get those through, again, like you said, you tie in those methods, so you can get them through PvP, you can get them through PvE, completing dailies, things like that. So you've really worked that into the system very well.
Yeah, that's one thing that the systems team takes pride in, is everything is kind of tied very nicely together.
I was just kind of wondering with this, why transmute as opposed to something else? Because I remember kicking around suggestions on the forums at the time, asking, and I think they still wander around asking, but looking for ticket system or alternate currencies or something where it's just buy the item drop you want after you've ground that content sufficiently. I'm kind of wondering why specifically the retrade system. Well,
what retrading does is it doesn't invalidate the act of kind of going in and trying to get the thing. I'm a firm believer of that kind of feeling of looting that monster and whatnot, and did I get the thing I wanted or not, right? It's that very much that kind of jackpot feel. And if you're always looting tokens or you're always looting something else, there's never that moment. It's just a rote thing. There's never that hit of dopamine when, do I get this thing? And that's ultimately why it's not, loot 10 tokens and then go off and buy the thing you want. We still want that kind of feel and want you to put some effort towards, earning the item, but still have an alternate path to eventually earn the item.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because when you say it aloud, I don't think the token system would feel as rewarding as actually finding it.
I think all of us have played games with token systems. It's not. It's really not rewarding.
Yeah,
it's not. It's a little easier in that you're always kind of making that incremental progress, but that's why we went with the transmute side, because there is still always that incremental progress. You're always looting these, or there's a constant stream of transmute crystals, but it doesn't completely invalidate the grinds towards getting the gear. And sometimes you get that piece you want, and it's an amazing feeling, and then you get to save your transmute crystals for something else.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, and it gives people something to save up for. I mean, I know that in advance of some new gear coming out, I'll make sure that my transmute crystals are stacked up and just in reserve. But I'll also see the opposite, where we're running a dungeon that we've run for the 10th time or whatever, and someone says, "Oh, great! I need that piece because that one you have, I actually have one I haven't transmuted, but you got the right one. Can I have it?" And it's cool to like hand that off so people, can still play it the other way around too, and they'll save those crystals for a later rainy day.
You couldn't always trade things to people in your group either. That was something we put in after launch as well.
What?
Yeah. Oh God, I didn't want to think about
that. I know nothing.
Yes, you are spoiled. But that was another quality of life thing that we wanted that we did. Honestly, I don't even remember when we did that. Do you, Stark?
It was post Dark Brotherhood.
Yeah.
I want to say it was with Shadows of the Hist or
maybe one Tamriel. It might have been one Tamriel, actually.
Yeah.
Somewhere
in there. Well, that was the other thing too, because before one Tamriel, there weren't a lot of set drops in dungeons.
Oh.
Because a lot of those, when Tamriel rolled in, there were a lot of new dungeon sets created for that. So yeah, I think that was the same time frame. Was that they were added in, and then also the loot sharing system. Because if you go back far enough, one of the things that's really funny was when Dark Brotherhood dropped, you could get Ebon Armory from vendors. You could buy them from guild traders, because that was actually picking up as bind on pickup. It wasn't, or bind on equip, not bind on pickup. So
yeah, I think that was I want to say that was in a zone somewhere.
I think it was actually, it was either in a zone or it was tied to, I think that one was tied to one of the trials where it was actually bind on equip. Because the ones that were overland zones were things like Viper used to be an overland set. So did Warlock. I think Lich used to be. That was a Dolmen drop, I think, originally.
I honestly don't remember. There's so many sets in the game, we have completely changed paradigms a couple of times now.
You need to have every single set drop memorized.
I've done a lot of shit in the last 12 years.
Well, so speaking of me being spoiled, because we are in the best of ways, the Somerset babies, as I call them, moving into this is I don't know. I'm not even sure why it put it on my roadmap. I mean, it wasn't necessarily Somerset Press that caught my eye, but maybe it's something. I remember I had people in my Twitch stream saying, you need to go check out Elder Scrolls Online. They've got some good sales going on. They've got new content that's out. Go play it. The community's amazing. So segueing into Somerset, you guys, by this point, with Morrowind under the belt there, with the Warden class and all of that, set yourself up, and with one Tamriel, I should say, put yourself in this really good place to get this notoriety within the Elder Scrolls community especially, but maybe starting to stretch out into the other MMOs, that you're this very welcoming community that has this very approachable system. So with the nostalgia of Morrowind behind you, what was the reasoning for taking us over to Somerset, this very, again, summery feeling island?
It was one of the early discussions that I had with Matt was I wanted to do something completely different. I wanted to kind of flip the script, do something that people hadn't really ever seen in Elder Scrolls games before. And, when you look at the stories that are told and the biomes and environments that they're told in, they're not traditionally high magic, high fantasy. And Somerset is the antithesis of that. It's the exact opposite, where it is very high magic and it looks like it's almost cultivated through magic, and it's super bright and flowery and cheery and has a lot of those high fantasy feelings with the super insanely tall towers and things like that. So it was very, very different than Morrowind or anything else we had done.
The imagery is extremely striking, from the actual concept art to the imagery used on boxes, et cetera, that when you go there, and I think that's a common trend among I hear it said a lot for newer players coming into the game, that they're like, well, do I get Somerset? And people are like, well, if you get it, you need to go view that, because it is visually very striking. It is, like you said, very cheery, the towers. And we get a lot of magic. For our magic wielding friends, we in fact get the Psijic skill line there and that guild, for lack of, do you guys even consider, when you look at the Psijics, do you call them a guild, Rich, internally? Is that?
We do. They are a guild.
And why did they come about? Because again, very different contrast from things like the Dark Brotherhood and the Thieves Guild that we've known from many different iterations in that way. We've played them, we've been them. Why did the Psijics come about here?
They are essentially the founders of magic in Tamriel. And if we were going to an extremely high magic place, it made a lot of sense to focus in on the Psijic Order and tell some of their story.
And it's probably, I think, well, I guess I should say these stories from Somerset as a whole have really captivated people, especially you guys winning the Glad Award just a couple weeks back. I think that was handed over for some of the amazing storytelling there.
My Doge, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Okay.
We're all dog lovers here, including everyone listening at home on their podcast. They're all dog lovers. Hi, puppy.
I'm just glad I've got
What a butthead.
He's like, I know you're recording, so is this his reflection again? Is he after the reflection?
No, he's sitting on his bed yelling at Mama to bring him something, I think. It's like, shut up, jackass. And of course, you can't yell at him because he's deaf, so he just looks at you like you're a fool.
Well,
he knows exactly what he's doing.
I was going to say, Louis
he's not dumb.
They just know. Like, we're going to work you guys. So again, congratulations on that Glad Award, because that's a really, really cool achievement out there, making some of these great quests. And I think that was Tori on the quest team that did that, if I remember correctly.
Tori was the writer. Eric Bakudis was the designer that worked on it. And that's one of the things I like so much about the team that we have, is they do kind of everything together. They're very collaborative, and they're not afraid to tell all kinds of different stories. That's one of the things that the content team really nails in terms of making the world feel believable, is they just tell stories. There's gay people, there's straight people, there's trans people, like they're just people. And it's just their world. They're a part of the world. There's no pomp, there's no show, there's no flair for calling any of that stuff out. It's just there. And when you find it, you're like, that makes sense. That feels like it fits in the world. And I'm pretty proud of the team for that.
Oh yeah, definitely. That is a very cool approach to it. That is, I know people in my chat were raving about that. So again, kudos to the team working on all of that. And back to the Psijics a little bit, focusing on their storyline a bit. Why, or what are kind of some of the pros and cons of developing a skill line for them? So making them a guild instead of maybe making a class that is, again, more of a mage type class.
Well, I think what you said at the very end rings very true. So we have mage type classes in the game already with a sorcerer, and really any of the classes can have magic. Stamina or magic are really your two choices. So the Psijic Order didn't feel like it was a class, but it felt like a guild and a guild skill line. Like when you look at Thieves Guild, you got thiefy type things. When you looked at Dark Brotherhood, you got murdery type things. And with the Psijic Order, you got some more magic-y type things that you could use on your character. You were part of the Psijic Order as the guild. And that's ultimately why we decided on skill line versus class there.
I also have now learned that I'm just going to say I'm over here doing murdery type things. Don't worry about me. These are just murdery type things. Don't look too closely. I love that, though. I mean, and again, that's a huge. Well, I guess one aspect of looking at it too is if it's a guild line, it is available to a lot more people, even those that are not willing to or not in the those that are not looking to re-roll an entire class, they get to be immersed in this. It gives them some diversity in what they're doing in game already. So I think that has a huge appeal to players too.
It does, and it's something that we wanted to experiment with a little bit as well. You know, the Warden is a good class and was successful, but we wanted to see what a skill line felt like, and if we could make a skill line feel as cool as, say, Dark Brotherhood did. And I think Psijic Order was pretty successful as well. Overall, I mean, there's some nitpicks and grumblings about how it takes too long to, you know, advance through the ranks and whatnot. But those are lessons learned that we can take for the future.
Actually, can I pick at that for a second? Because I got
sure.
Two thoughts. One is that I've noticed as skill lines go, it's probably either the fastest or second fastest to level in the game. Because the only thing I can think of that you can actually just go straight 1 to max, and it's 1 to 10, is Werewolf, and do that faster.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I always understand the complaint, but I always catch myself in this weird state where it's like, but if this was faster, the arguments about pay to win might actually have some ground. Because you really are, it's just run around and do these things.
Well, and I think that's the crux of the issue is the going around and finding all of, you know, the Psijic things in order to advance to the cool story questy part. Felt to players that it took too long because it was the same kind of activity over and over and over. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you look at something like Mages Guild, where you're collecting books, at least you're going to different zones, and along the way you get to kill things and do things. Or with Fighters Guild, you can just go grind and kill things. Or like you said, with Werewolf, you can just turn into a werewolf and run around, and that feels like it's different kind of gameplay all the time.
Mm-hmm. Even if you can do it in one sitting in, like, I think 45 minutes or so.
That does not sound like it's out of the realm of possibility, especially with some of the new changes we made fairly recently to allow you to sustain your werewolf form longer.
Yeah, it's a lot easier now. Mm-hmm. It used to be really difficult to do it in a single transform, and now it's like, yep. Werewolves
are in a good spot.
The other thing I noticed with Psijic, and this is, it does do something I remember not seeing issues with, well, not seeing issues, but encountering in zone chat from Morrowind, where Psijic Order really forces you to get back into the base game zones. So if you're just starting out there, you don't have the option to just pick up this skill line and then keep wandering around this map and not realize, oh, wait, there's an entire world here. It's not just this one zone. And I actually remember in the beta and then like the original PTS, and then also when it went live, seeing people where they get the Iliac Bay map and then they're like, where is this on the island? And it's like, no, that's actually the rest of the map. Mm-hmm. So I just thought that to a certain extent, as much as the finding portals may be a little tedious, it did do something really useful there in showing players that the whole world was there.
That was, again, another conscious decision. And that was something we actually learned from Thieves Guild. Because with Thieves Guild, we sent you outside of the zone as well. And we did that with Dark Brotherhood as well.
That is, Stark said that exact thing, that it was probably a conscious decision. And he said that probably sometime last year, and it immediately changed my opinion on what that was because of the grumbling that, you know, it does take so long to go and do it all. But then when he said, you know, there's a lot of people, Stark, you remember you saying this to me, there's a lot of people that don't realize that by right-clicking on your map, you actually are going out of zone. That when you're just new into it. And then I remember, you know, when I started in Vardenfell, I didn't know that either. It's not, you know, you can't feed everything through the UI in that sense. And so this is a great way of doing that. That's both, it's ingrained into the game. And so sure, maybe the 7th time you go through it is a lot of running, but for people that are starting out, especially those that are coming in with Somerset and they are starting in that zone, it is trying to show them that there is an entire vast world out there.
There is a method to the madness sometimes, yes.
Sometimes. So can we talk about some other madness? And you could sell this as much as you want, Rich. That's some madness that we are going to elsewhere now in... Well, PTS is not far off here as of the time of recording, but right now we're about just a month and 10 days from hitting Necromancy Dragons and Elsewhere on the live servers.
Wow, that's terrifying.
You're welcome. I am here. I will always be your countdown clock. Don't you worry.
Oh boy.
Of 1 month, 10 days, and 7 minutes.
But you're right. It is exciting. Really, really exciting, because these are all things that we do for a very, very long time. You know, the necromancer was something that people in beta had been yelling and screaming about. You know, why is there not a necromancer class? It makes sense. And dragons is something we've wanted to put in for a very long time as well. I actually got into a little bit of trouble in an interview just before launch where I wouldn't tell the interviewer that we will never have dragons. And I was told to say that. And I refused to, because I knew that at some point we would probably have dragons. And then lo and behold, we have dragons. So
you're redeemed now.
I do. I definitely am now. At the time I wasn't, but
oopsies. So, I mean, that's massive, and that's kind of what we want to gear some of these questions here towards the end of this interview, is that, I mean, those are some huge pivotal points. I mean, you got the dragon lovers that were, you know, playing Skyrim, and so that's such a notable thing for them, considering coming over to this game. I mean, that's a big piece of press that they're going to be here, and Khajiit lovers, which are very devoted to their race and the lore of it, because it's very deep. Going to elsewhere and having those dragons, and now we're taking, like you just said, the necromancer that's been requested since beta. If you can share some of the stuff, why now, Rich? What kind of brought those things together? Did they come together intentionally, all three at once, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that kind of goes back to the story stuff and the ideas that, you know, when Matt and I are kind of talking about, you know, what is this theme for the update? And I really liked the idea of dragons. And one of the issues we had was the lore says, if you look really, really hard, that dragons are hidden in the second era. They're not really around. And so we had to kind of come up with an idea of, well, how could they be around? And that's where I fell in love with the idea of the Halls of Colossus, because it was another kind of enigma nobody really knew too much about. And then as we started kind of riffing on that, we were like, okay, well, we have dragons, we have the Khajiit, you know, what's something else that would be really, really interesting to do? And we had wanted to do another class after the Warden, because we thought we could take a lot of things that we learned from the Warden and make the next class even better than the Warden. And so it just kind of started snowballing from there. And we had to take a step back and go, okay, there's a lot of cool stuff here. Can we actually do this before we committed to it? But the story drove a lot of the decisions that we made for the elsewhere in this kind of season of the Dragon.
Having been into it, and now more people have had the chance with PAX East and all the other, you know, the other opportunities out there to play. People are so excited. I mean, you see it in my chat all the time, how we're just out of our minds. Every day we're just trying to put the lid, like the cork back in of the excitement, trying our best. And it doesn't help when someone says, is this necromancer going to be any good? And I'm like, yes, it's going to be great. I love it. I just want to shake them. So kind of approaching this class, I mean, they're, like you said, requested since beta. It's something that you've probably heard me say, that I've checked in over the years and been like, well, do they have a necromancer? No. Well, maybe I'll check back later. And so I imagine that, you know, our lovers of that and of dragons are going to flock to this expansion, this chapter, maybe more than Somerset in some ways. So what does it feel like to be giving so many huge tentpole items at once? That's just a lot going on.
It is. There's a lot going on. I am cautiously excited, I guess, about all of this kind of going out, because I think that the Necromancer is the best class we've ever built up to this point. I think we did learn a lot with the Warden. We learned a lot in our development processes for, building the Necromancer. This was the first time that we had multiple outside groups come in and actually play the Necromancer at a point in time where we could react to it and take feedback on it. So we had the class reps come in in February, and then we had a number of our influencers, which you were kind of a part of, Kyle, in going through and playing that afterwards. And we took the class rep feedback and we made a bunch of changes. And then when you guys all came in and started playing it, you were like, this is awesome. Like, this feels really good. And then we took some of your feedback as well from that, and we made more changes to really improve the class even more. So when that hits PTS I guess next week, people are gonna see a much more polished experience that feels like it should have been there all along, which is really exciting.
And that is, having talked to some of the class reps there and hearing them say, oh, we suggested this, and we said, that is totally happening. It's a good feeling just in this very small group to see that it happened in that way. Like you said, you had the time to make the adjustments for the feedback. And I always tell people that this definitely feels like a necromancer. No matter what other necromancer you have in mind, this does its very best to encapsulate the, again, tent poles of what a necromancer should be. I mean, you're dealing with the undead, but you've also got scythe type things. It's just a great feel. So kind of how did that come about, Rich? I guess the question I want to ask, maybe to help, because it's a large one, how do you distill down some of those concepts of what is a necromancer and try and shove that all into a class?
There's a lot of discussion back and forth between the teams. I mean, our process for the necromancer is very similar to kind of how we build zones, where I sit down with the team and I talk about high-level concepts, high-level goals, give them some acceptance criteria and some guidance, and then let them kind of go off and try to build something that kind of ticks all those boxes. I don't go in and say, I want the necromancer to do this, 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 and this. I go in and I say the class that we're building has to fit in with Elder Scrolls lore. And by fitting in with Elder Scrolls lore, I mean, their magics are themed around illusion and conjuration and destruction. And they need to fit in kind of the same paradigm that we have with our classes, where they can fulfill any role. And they have to be unique and have their own unique theme and feel and play style. And so that's where we started getting into things like, well, pets. They're not permanent pets. They're more minions. So you're not kind of micromanaging and playing with those pets. That's when we started getting into the idea of positional gameplay. And this is something that Rob really championed and pushed hard on. He's our lead gameplay designer. He kind of came in and he was like, hey, positional gameplay should, change the way you kind of play the necromancer. And I mean, Kyle, you've played it at this point, so you kind of know and kind of understand those themes a little bit and can take those kind of pillars and see in the gameplay how that really came about and how it all kind of coalesced into one thing.
Absolutely. And I one thing that really stood out to me was the excitement from everyone that came in the room while we were testing it, how excited people were to see us both playing through elsewhere and just using the necromancer in content that we can already access on live. Just how passionate everyone was there for us doing it. And I want to say that there were some huge glaring smiles on people's faces from just like seeing an influencer do something crazy that they didn't expect. So I think that's a huge testament to what you guys have going on there, because we always tell that to people when they come into the channel and ask, is this game dead? Is this something that gets...
That drives me up a wall every time I hear that.
Oh, good.
I just love to put stats in their face and say, no, look, this is one of the most selling MMOs out there, and it is constantly releasing this content that is not just content, but quality content, thought through content, and best of all, content that is extremely has so much passion invested in it. It's not just this random necromancer class thrown out there but it's because your team really cares that it's done and it's done well. So
yeah, I mean, we love the game. We love what we do, and we love kind of seeing what players do in the game. You know, just seeing people, you know, jump into Elsewhere at that event that we had a few weeks ago, where some people, you know, ran off to go and look at all of the cool new outfits, and other people ran off to go do the main story and play through that, and other people were dueling, and other people were fooling around with the necromancer and trying to figure out all the, like, that to us was super, super awesome, because we got to see a whole bunch of different play styles at the same time. And, you know, seeing Colin sit down with a number of you and just talk about houses and housing and the types of things that you wanted to see, you know, that's awesome. And that's something that the team definitely takes to heart whenever they try to build something new.
That was great. I think you quoted. We talked Colin's ear for probably like 3 hours or something.
Yeah, it was crazy. And he was grinning the whole time.
It was so much fun. And again, that's that passion that, you know, he came in wanting to hear what we wanted, and it turned into this idea of like, he's like, I want to do this too. And so that's something that I think players, I think if you are a player that doesn't really get a chance to interact with a lot of game developers, there's a lot of voices out there that feel a bit lost, or they think that their voice is lost. And it's heard here. You guys really took a lot to heart, especially in this chapter. I mean, giving so much that we've wanted to see, and with such a high attention to detail. So I know people out there are going to be super excited to play Elsewhere in just a short while. Stark, do you have any questions for Rich on this topic before we keep him too long?
On the subject of Elsewhere?
Yeah.
Still kind of wondering what picked up with Elsewhere itself, like as opposed to anywhere else on the map. But
why we chose Elsewhere?
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to the story thing again, and when I really fell in love with the idea of going to Colossus, and the Halls of Colossus is in Elsewhere, so we were like, okay, well, that makes sense. You know, it makes sense that in the grand scheme of the world, if dragons were released and they were only in Elsewhere, that people could have forgotten that this event happened.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how we tied it all together and made it fit within the lore. And that was something that we actually worked through with the Bethesda team on. And they were like, yeah, that's awesome. Do it.
Yeah, because there's a few places, like, that was one of the things, like there are a few places in the map where they are specifically remote enough that you could get away with stuff like that. So I was wondering whether it was just the cats or...
I mean, the cats definitely helped, but so did having this really cool kind of mythical place in the Halls of Colossus.
Well, and actually that's a fun one, because Halls of Colossus, correct me if I'm remembering this wrong, but that's actually one of the locations in Arena, isn't it?
It is. So, that is specifically why it was chosen.
Ooh.
I think there's only like one or two of those that haven't been covered yet by ESO. Like I know Labyrinthian hasn't been. But is there? I think that's it too. Because like Eldenroot, I think was one, or Greenheart was. I don't remember. There's one in Valenwood. Fanglair was one. Crypt of Hearts is one. I forget. I think Dagoth Ur is the Morrowind one.
Oh, really? Fanglair?
Yeah, I'm really fuzzy on that. Like Fanglair is from Arena.
Huh. That
was actually going to be one of the... it was funny. I pulled out a dungeon map that I had done when I was the dungeon lead in 2008. And Fanglair was on that list of dungeons that I wanted to build. And then we built it. It took us a little while to get there, but we built it, which was cool.
Yeah. I think I'm forgetting some, but I don't remember where the Alakir one is, or the Hammerfell one is. Now I'm thinking about it, because I know there's one out there. I think it's in game, but I can't remember where it is.
Well, and I guess a good end cap to this too, Rich, if you want to talk to this in any way, shape, or form, is the idea that this is going to be your first year of cohesive content. So we're looking in the Season of the Dragon. So for the people out there that, you know, if you haven't heard this before, we got our 2 dungeons that lead up to Elsewhere. That was with our Wrathstone DLC. Now we're getting Elsewhere, and then the rest of the year somehow tied together. So do you have anything you want to kind of add to that idea, Rich? Like why this came about now? You know, if you have grander schemes for this?
Well, so ultimately, you know, when you go back and you look at what we've done in the previous years, if we take, say, last year in Somerset, where the year of content last year was undead dragons / necro, in Dragon Bones. Then it was talking about the high elves, and then it moved into Wolf Hunter, which was kind of werewolf theme, and then we finished the year off with Murkmire talking about the Argonians. So as a player kind of coming in, or a returning player, you don't really know or understand what's going on, and you have to kind of guess which is going to be the most important thing. And with the season of, we can say this entire year is focused on this story. If you want to get in from the start, here's where you start versus, towards the end or whatnot. And it's still up to the player, because the stories all stand alone and they all make sense by themselves. But if you play it through over the course of the entire year, you get that cohesive story.
I think it's going to be amazing. I am very excited to see where the rest of the year takes us here.
Yes, E3 is going to be very, very, very exciting.
Ooh.
Well, you said back in January that the second half of that trailer is coming out, or next part of that trailer.
The next part of the trailer is coming out, and it is freaking awesome.
Oh my gosh. Well, there you go. Well, Rich, thank you.
There's my teaser.
That's a fantastic teaser. It's a great way to leave people here. Thank you so much for taking the time coming on here talking to us about this, because like I said, I know everyone is so excited to get into it. And if you haven't picked up a copy of it, you should definitely go in and pre-order now. You're actually going to get yourself a mount, so make sure you do that. If you're someone that's considering buying into the game and you found this content, do that sooner than later. For PC users, you'll get this elsewhere. Will come out May 20th if you've pre-ordered or purchase it then. And for console, that will be June 4th. Again, Rich, thank you so much for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule.
This was a blast. Thank you, guys.
You're always welcome here, Rich. And if you want to catch up with him and harass him while he's running some dungeons with us, you can do that over on my Twitch channel. You may have missed the opportunity. You can find pictures of it. It's on his feed of a wonderful naked character doing that Valkyrie hold. So,
oh, that was fun.
He's got a little belly button shield on, boots and shoulders. That's about it. So that's your lasting impression of Rich. Rich, thank you again. We will talk to you hopefully very soon and get you maybe back on this year to talk about some more content if you're available. And
that sounds great.
Everyone out there, go snag yourself a copy elsewhere. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Hey everybody, Kyle jumping in here at the end. Again, a huge shout out to Rich Lambert for coming onto the show. I hope you enjoyed that. I wanted to pop in here at the very end and give you guys our links. If you don't know and you need to send us an email, you can do that at kyledempsterstudios@gmail.com. If you want to find me over on Twitch, that's at twitch.tv/Kyle Dempster Studios. Again, Stark, Rich, myself, we're always hanging out there doing something crazy. So come by, hang out. That's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They all start at 4 p.m. Eastern time. If you want to follow me over on Twitter, that is twitter.com/Kyle Dempster STU. And Stark is at twitter.com/Michael J. Schwartz. I also want to throw a big shout out to the fact that we've redone the website. Is that even a shout out if it's to your own thing? Anyway, the point is we've redone the website and I think it's looking pretty snazzy. Warning that it's still a little under construction. So if you're poking around there, you might find something that looks a little out of whack. Feel free to email that to me if you see something weird, but we got the podcast up there. I also want to shout out that with going full time recently, I've started a new show and it is called ESO Flash Briefing. And it's a once a week show and it's about 10 minutes long per episode, covering the latest ESO news, including things in the Crown Store and other just quick summaries, like what events started this week, etc., etc. So if you want to get your hands on that one, ESO Flash Briefing, you should be able to search that. All the links you'll need are in the show notes below, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the description below. So take a look for that. The ESO Flash Briefing thing is up on the website. That is kyledempsterstudios.com/podcasts. Until next week. Bye-bye.